From betrayal to subtle revenge. What happened when I learned the truth? My story began with small things. The kind that are easy to miss, but eventually grow into a torrent, like drops of rain forming a flood. She had always been perfect to me. Smart, beautiful, charismatic. But something changed. She started coming home late from work. Her phone was always on silent, and her gaze seemed distant. I convinced myself it was just my imagination until I saw the first strange charge on our bank statement. It came from a restaurant we had never visited. I decided to ask her about it, but all I got was a casual smile and the words, "It was a business lunch with colleagues." And then came the evening when she was working late again. I decided to check her story and drove to her office. The lights in her office were off. My heart sank. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dark building, trying to find an explanation for what was happening. The next day, I accidentally found her old phone in a drawer. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I felt a mixture of fear and hope as I unlocked it. And there I saw the messages. There were many. From someone she had saved as Maria, work. But those words were just a cover. The messages were too warm, too intimate to be about work. My heart raced as I scrolled through them. Every word hit me like a slap in the face. But what shocked me the most was the photo. A photo of them together, taken at that same restaurant. Her eyes glowed the way they used to when she was with me. I didn't know how to proceed. Should I confront her? Quietly ask her about it? Or maybe play my own game to learn more? One thing was clear. The perfect picture of our life had shattered. I hesitated for a long time, but the decision came on its own. I couldn't live in ignorance anymore. Every moment with her became a burden. Her smile felt fake, her touch foreign. I had to find this Maria and figure out what was really going on. I started with the messages. Her number was saved on the phone, and when my wife was busy, I wrote it down. My hands trembled as I searched for information about this person. Social media yielded results. The profile belonged to a man. Handsome, with a self-assured look. His photo sparked a wave of anger in me. He had what was mine. Without much thought, I messaged him, pretending to be my wife. A small message requesting a meeting. The response came quickly. He chose a cafe in the city center, and I agreed. I didn't yet know how I would handle it, but it didn't matter anymore. The main thing was to see this man and hear everything in person. The cafe was cozy, but I felt out of place there. All those couples in love, the laughter, the music, it only fueled my anger. A few minutes later, he walked in, tall, in an expensive suit. He looked like someone who spent every day at the gym and knew exactly how to impress. I gestured for him to join me. He stopped, surprised, but sat down. "You're not Maria," he said, studying me closely. "No, but I think we have some common interests," I replied, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. He smiled, leaned forward, and asked quietly, "Is this about your wife?" His confidence irritated me. What other options could there be? "Exactly," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I need the truth. From you." He looked at me, then nodded. "You want to know everything? Fine. But what I'm going to tell you might not be easy to hear." His words stunned me. He told me everything, sparing no details. Their meetings, the moments they spent together, the things she said to him. Each revelation felt like a punch to the gut. But the most shocking part wasn't that. He said she initiated everything. She, my perfect wife. Everything I thought was our shared life turned out to be a lie. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear his words. But when he said the last sentence, time seemed to stop. And one more thing. She didn't just want to have fun. She said you have your secrets. And that this was her way of punishing you. I sat at the table long after he left. My mind raced with thoughts. What did she mean? What had I done to deserve this? But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. I came home late at night. The apartment was dark and quiet, like the calm before a performance. She was already asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching her. Her beauty seemed as unwavering as it had been the day I first saw her. But now, it was just a facade hiding betrayal. I knew that breaking this illusion now would be too easy. Throwing everything on the table and demanding answers would give her relief and me defeat. No, I had to do this differently. Her lies didn't deserve a simple ending. I had to play by my own rules. The next morning, I began to act. The first step was to leave everything as it was. I played the role of a loving husband who suspected nothing. Morning coffee for her, compliments, jokes over breakfast. She had no idea that I scrutinized her every move. Her phone became my guide. I saw how new messages came in, how she quickly read them, trying not to draw my attention. But it wasn't enough. I decided to find her weak spot, something that would make her feel like she wasn't in control, but I was. My search led me to her workplace. No, I didn't go there openly. Instead, I used the internet. Her colleagues, projects, even corporate photos. Everything was accessible if you knew where to look. And I found what I was looking for. Her long-awaited promotion was at risk due to a new company review. This was my chance. I knew I had to act carefully. I didn't plan to ruin her career, but it was enough to make her realize that her perfect life was hanging by a thread. That evening, I pretended to stay late at work. In reality, I went to the restaurant where they often met. My goal was simple, to see her with him with my own eyes. And it happened. She was sitting at a table by the window, smiling the same smile I remembered. But now it belonged to someone else. I watched from a distance, feeling each passing minute fuel a new wave of anger. And that's when the plan came to me. They didn't notice me, and I left quietly, leaving them in their little world. But now, I knew what to do. The next day, I sent her a bouquet of roses. From me. She was surprised, even a little flustered. In the evening, I pretended to forget about the flowers and asked who had brightened her day. She grew nervous, but quickly came up with an answer, a colleague. Her lie was almost perfect, but I could already see the cracks in her mask. I began to play. Each day, a new surprise. Messages I forgot to delete, questions that made her uneasy. I saw how she began to doubt her flawless game. Then I decided to raise the stakes. I organized a dinner with her closest friends. They didn't know it was a trap. But among the guests was Maria. I wanted to see her reaction when she realized her secret was now part of my plan. The evening went well. Her laughter rang out as usual, but I noticed how her gaze kept flickering to him. Her anxiety was evident, and it only bolstered my confidence. But the climax was yet to come. "Dear friends," I said, raising my glass. "Tonight, I want to say something special to someone who means so much to me." I looked at her. Her eyes widened. "I want to thank you, my love, for all these years together, for always being there, even when we both kept our secrets." Her glass nearly slipped from her hands, and the friends exchanged puzzled glances. Her eyes met mine, and I saw what I had expected, fear. It all happened in an instant, but that instant felt like an eternity. Her hand trembled, her glass wobbled slightly, drawing everyone's attention. The silence that followed was deafening, filling the air with tension. "Is something wrong, darling?" I asked with a faint smile, masking the storm inside me. "No, everything's fine," she replied, but her voice betrayed her. It was too shaky, too weak. The guests exchanged glances, their curiosity almost tangible. I decided to continue. "You know," I addressed everyone, "secrets are a funny thing. They have a way of coming out at the most unexpected moments. For instance, you might think you're in control, but one day—" I paused, letting the moment hang heavy, making everyone hold their breath. "You realize that control was just an illusion," I finished, looking straight at her. Her eyes frantically searched for a way out, but found none. One of the guests, her closest friend, finally broke the silence. "What does all this mean?" "You're speaking in riddles," she said, trying to ease the tension. I took a deep breath and, raising my glass, said, "It means that tonight we're going to learn more than we planned." Those words caused her to lose her composure. She abruptly stood up, nearly knocking over her chair, and said, "This is ridiculous. I don't understand what you want," her voice rising, her face turning red. "What do I want?" I repeated, calmly standing. "I want to understand how someone I trusted completely could betray me. I want to know how she will explain this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the photo of her at the restaurant with him. The image on the screen was clear and damning. She saw it and sharply inhaled. The guests froze as if they were watching a movie, and the pivotal moment had arrived. "He's just a friend," she exclaimed, trying to justify herself. Her voice was too emotional to convince anyone. "A friend you spend nights with? A friend who's become closer to you than I am?" My words were cold and cutting. Her friend, sitting nearby, looked at her in shock. "Is this true?" she asked, but suspicion was already evident in her tone. She could no longer deny the obvious. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of shame or remorse. This was fear. Her perfect world was beginning to crumble right in front of everyone. I didn't want it to happen this way," she said, but her words came too late. "Then why did it happen?" I asked, my words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You had a choice, but you made yours." At that moment, the door opened, and he walked in. Tall, self-assured, wearing that same smile that once seemed charming to me. He froze, seeing me, her, and the guests. His confidence wavered. "Well, it seems our company is now complete," I said, addressing everyone. As he entered, the room filled with oppressive tension. His confidence, so evident in every photo, was now gone. His eyes darted from the faces of the guests to hers, and then to me. I held my phone like a weapon, ready to strike. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice restrained but hesitant. "It's good you came," I replied, sitting back down. "Tonight, we're having a truth session, and it seems you have something to contribute." My wife looked at him, her face flushing with shame. Her hands nervously gripped the fabric of her dress, a gesture more revealing than any words. He tried to say something, but I cut him off. "Take your time," I said, tossing the phone onto the table so everyone could see the photos. "Let's start with how long this has been going on." His eyes fixed on the screen, and he realized there was no avoiding an answer. He inhaled, as if preparing to say something significant, but my wife thought she had to act first. It meant nothing," she exclaimed, her voice too loud for the room. "It was a mistake I tried to fix." "A mistake?" I coldly repeated her words. "A mistake is a one-time accident. This is not a mistake. It's a choice." I turned to him. His confidence had completely melted away, and now he looked like a cornered animal. "And what do you have to say?" I asked, not breaking eye contact. "Listen, it's not what you think," he began, but I interrupted him. "Oh, it's exactly what I think. So speak the truth, or I will." His words spilled out like loose gravel. He started with the usual excuses. "It wasn't serious, she came to me." But with every sentence, the picture became clearer. He described how it started. Her messages, their conversations, how she complained about me. His words were knives to my heart, but I forced myself to listen. "You don't understand," she said, nearly shouting. "You only ever thought about yourself." I felt so alone. Lonely? I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. "Did you ever think about how I feel right now? What am I supposed to do with this?" She fell silent, but her face showed a wounded expression, as if she believed she had a right to justify herself. "You know, the worst part isn't even the betrayal," I continued, addressing both of them. "The worst part is how the two of you thought you could hide it, that I was stupid enough not to notice." The guests were silent, their eyes darting between me, her, and him. It was a scene that seemed destined to end with an explosion. But I wasn't finished yet. "You said it was a mistake?" I asked, turning to her again. "Fine. Then tell me this. How are you planning to fix it? What were you going to do?" She averted her gaze but said nothing. Her silence was answer enough for me. "And you?" I turned to him. "Are you happy now? Was it worth it?" He shrugged but said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words. I stood up, looking at them both. "I'll do you both a favor," I said, coldly glaring at them. "I'll leave you with your secrets. But don't think it'll be that easy." I walked toward the door, leaving the room in silence. But before stepping out, I turned back and added, "Next time, make sure I don't find out. Because then, it'll be different." I left that dinner feeling like I'd made the right move, but it brought no peace. Questions swirled in my head, questions I hadn't gotten answers to. There was something else, something she was still hiding. I could feel it. and that feeling wouldn't let me rest. The next day, I woke up with a clear resolution. I had to know the whole truth, not just what she'd been forced to admit, but everything she was still concealing. I no longer trusted her words. And if this was her way of punishing me, I needed to understand why. My first step was her phone. While she was in the bathroom, I quickly took it and scrolled through her contacts. The man from the dinner was only one of many. His number was saved under a coded name, but that no longer surprised me. What did surprise me was another name that appeared repeatedly in her call and message history. Kim, work. My fingers tightened around the phone. Why hadn't I noticed this before? Out of curiosity, I opened their messages. They were almost empty, just short phrases and emojis. But what startled me was the fact that there were several photos of this same man in her gallery. He wasn't as confident as the first man, but his smile was familiar. He worked in the same company as my wife. Something didn't add up. I decided to dig deeper. Her laptop, which I'd always considered off-limits, held even more secrets. While she was out for a walk, I connected it to my account and copied all the files. Among the documents, I found not only work reports but also letters. And one of them shook me to my core. My love, I'm afraid he might find out. We need to be careful. I don't want to lose what we have. But if he figures out there's something between us, it'll ruin everything. The letter was addressed to the same Kim, but this was only the beginning. I met with the first man, Maria, again to confirm my suspicions. He seemed unexpectedly calm when I showed him the letter. I didn't know about this, he said, carefully reading the text. But now I understand why she was always so cautious. What do you mean? I asked, feeling anger rising in my chest. She had something else, and I think it's not even me, but someone else. She's not who she pretends to be. His words were painful, but they confirmed my suspicions. This was only the tip of the iceberg. The next day, I found an excuse to go to her workplace. Walking through the office corridors, I felt like an outsider, but moved confidently toward her office. When I opened the door, I saw him. The same Kim. He was standing next to her, leaning over her computer. Their eyes quickly met mine. I need to talk, I said, and my voice left no room for negotiation. Kim looked at her, then at me. She turned pale. It's okay, Kim. I'll talk to him, she said, trying to stay calm. But her trembling hands betrayed her emotions. Kim reluctantly left, and I closed the door behind him. What does all this mean? I asked, but her silence forced me to continue. Do you think I can't see something's wrong? Who is he to you? She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw everything. Fear, shame, confusion. But I wanted the truth. It's complicated, she finally replied. Then explain it to me. I deserve to know what's going on. My words were cold but firm. She turned away, as if trying to gather her thoughts. Then she said, there are things you don't understand, and I don't even know where to start. She stayed silent longer than I could tolerate. Her back was to me, and her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Finally, she took a deep breath, but her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. You don't know everything, she said, and her words carried a mix of fear and despair. Then tell me. I'm tired of the lies. My words cut through the silence like a knife. She turned to me, and in her eyes, I saw something unexpected, tears. These weren't the performative emotions I'd seen before. These tears were real. Do you remember a few years ago when you went on that business trip? She asked, her voice hoarse. I nodded. It was just an ordinary work trip, nothing special. Or so I thought. That's when I found out you. Her voice wavered. She looked away but then continued. You were with another woman. My thoughts froze. Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I tried to search my memory for anything that might confirm this, but it all felt unreal. What are you talking about? That's not true. I tried to keep my composure, but there was already a note of panic in my voice. I found the messages. I saw the calls. You didn't even try to hide it back then, she said, looking me straight in the eye. I waited for you to confess, but you just carried on as if nothing had happened. I was stunned. The accusation sounded utterly absurd. I couldn't recall a single instance when I had done anything like that, but the conviction in her voice made me doubt myself. I didn't do anything. This is a mistake, I said firmly, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. A mistake, she laughed bitterly. I thought so too. But over time, I realized you didn't even feel guilty. You just buried it, and we went on living as if nothing happened. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Her words hit like one blow after another. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. Is that why you did this? I asked, barely containing my anger. You decided revenge was the best solution? At first, it wasn't revenge. Her voice softened again. It was an attempt to find myself. And then, I lost control. I felt trapped. Her words were so shocking I couldn't even process them. But my doubts remained. Something about her story didn't match reality. I knew it couldn't be true. But she believed it. Why? Who told you this? I asked, hoping to find the thread that would unravel this chaos. She looked at me in surprise. What do you mean? Did you find the evidence yourself? Or did someone help you? She fell silent, her eyes filling with tears again. It was your colleague. She showed me the messages. Said she saw you together. This was what I had feared. It was all part of a game I was only beginning to understand. My outrage knew no bounds. And you believed her? Just like that? I could barely contain my anger. She had proof, she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Have you thought about why she did it? Why at that moment? She didn't answer. Her silence was enough of an answer for me. My head was spinning with thoughts as I left her office. This wasn't just a simple betrayal. It was a multi-layered game in which I was just one of the players. But who was behind it? And why? I left her office with the feeling that my world had been turned upside down. Her confession sounded like an attempt to justify herself, but I could see there was more to it. The colleague who had provided the evidence was now my primary target. I knew this story had more layers than it appeared, and I had to get to the truth. Her name was Amanda. We had only seen each other a few times at corporate events. She was always smiling, charming, but there was also a certain coldness in her gaze. I recalled how she sat next to my wife, leaned in to whisper something to her, and laughed. Back then, it all seemed innocent, but now every movement of hers raised my suspicions. I found her social media profile. Photos, posts, comments, everything was perfectly curated, as if she had no shadow. But one small detail caught my attention. A shared photo with a man I had already seen. The same Maria? Interesting, I thought. This couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, I prepared myself. I sent her a message, posing as an ordinary acquaintance wanting to discuss business. She replied almost immediately. We arranged to meet at a cafe. I arrived early and took a seat in the corner, where I could see the entire room. She arrived right on time. Her appearance was flawless, a professional suit, a smile on her face, but there was a shadow in her eyes. She approached the table, and I stood to greet her. Amanda, thank you for finding the time, I said, shaking her hand. Always happy to help, she replied, sitting down. We started with small talk, discussing work and colleagues, but I quickly steered the conversation to something more personal. I've heard you're quite close with my wife, I said, trying to sound casual. You probably know her better than anyone else? Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Yes, we get along well. She's a wonderful person, she replied. Her tone was sincere, but I already knew it was part of the game. You know, we've been having some difficulties lately, and it seems it started after you talked to her about me, I continued, looking her directly in the eyes. She tilted her head slightly, her smile disappearing. What do you mean? I mean, someone showed her messages I didn't write, told her things that weren't true, and now my life is turned upside down. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of nervousness. I just wanted to help. She was so upset when she came to me, Amanda said, her voice trembling. Help? By showing her evidence you created yourself? My words were cold and sharp. She quickly looked away, her fingers nervously playing with a spoon. I knew you wouldn't believe me, she said, her tone shifting. It was no longer defensive but offensive. But if you want the truth, think about why she so easily believed you were guilty. Maybe she was just waiting for an excuse. You're deflecting, Amanda. I want an answer, Why did you do it? She remained silent for a few seconds, then sighed. Because I knew it would destroy you, she said quietly, but each word felt like a bullet. Her words stunned me. Her motives remained a mystery, but now I knew this was planned. The only question was why? As I was about to leave, she added, "Do you think this is the end? You have no idea what she's hiding." Her words were the final straw. I left the cafe feeling that I was close to finding answers. But was I ready for them? As I walked out of the cafe, Amanda's words echoed in my head. You have no idea what she's hiding. What exactly did she mean? Why did it sound like a warning? I knew I had to get to the bottom of this, even if the answer wasn't what I wanted. I returned home late. My wife was already asleep, her face peaceful, but to me, that peace looked like a mask. I watched her and felt a mix of anger, confusion, and pity. What didn't I know about the person I had spent so many years with? The next day, I began searching. I knew her past was fairly ordinary. A small town, high school, college. She rarely talked about friends or past partners, and I never thought much of it. But now, every detail seemed crucial. The first step was social media. Her profile was flawless, like everything else in her life. But when I started digging deeper, I found something interesting. A few photos she had deleted, but that still remained in her friends' albums. In one of them, she was with a group of people, but one man stood too close. His arm was around her waist, and their smiles were too genuine to be just friendly. His name was Travis. Searching for his name led me to a profile that hadn't been updated in years. But the comments on his posts raised alarms, mentions of my wife by other people. What did she see in you? One read. You didn't deserve her, said another. I decided to dig further. Old yearbooks, group photos. It all started to paint a picture. Travis was her first love. But what happened next? Why had she never mentioned him? After hours of searching, I found an article in a local newspaper. The headline was simple but sent chills down my spine. Local student receives probation for fraud. Travis was in the photo, and next to him, my wife was mentioned as someone who had helped the police uncover his scheme. Why had she never told me about this? What else was there in her past that I didn't know? I decided to confront her directly. That evening, as we sat at dinner, I suddenly asked, "Do you remember Travis?" She froze, her fork suspended in midair. Her eyes widened, and I saw panic flash across her face. Why are you asking? Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was nervous. I found some old photos. He seems like an important part of your past, I said, trying to keep my tone steady, though a storm was brewing inside me. She put her fork down and looked away. That was a long time ago. I didn't think it was worth mentioning, she said. Didn't think? I let out a bitter laugh. The person you worked with the police to bring down? That means nothing? Her head snapped up. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. He destroyed everything I believed in. I wanted to start over, to forget about it. Then why is it still haunting us? I stared directly at her. Amanda said you're hiding something. What is it? Her face turned pale, and I saw her look away again. It's not just Travis, she said quietly. There's something you don't know about me, and I'm not sure you want to hear it. Her words hung in the air like an unfinished promise. There's something you don't know about me. I looked at her, waiting for an explanation, but she just stared at her plate. My patience was wearing thin. What does that mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice level, though anger seeped into every word. What else do I need to know? She sighed, like someone resigning themselves to the inevitable. Travis, she said, barely audible. He's back. Those words hit like thunder. What do you mean, back? My hands clenched into fists. He contacted me a few months ago, she said, glancing nervously at me. At first, it was just messages. He said he wanted to apologize for everything that happened. But then he started insisting on meeting. And you agreed? I could barely hold back my anger. She shook her head vehemently. No, but he started showing up at my workplace. He even talked to Amanda. I thought it was a coincidence, but now I realize it's all part of his plan. My thoughts spiraled into chaos. Travis, her first love, the one who betrayed her trust, was now here. And he wasn't just back, He had integrated himself into her present life, even connecting with her colleague. But why? I felt this wasn't just an attempt to rekindle a past relationship. What does he want? I asked, trying to understand his motives. He said he wants to make things right, that he's changed and is ready to start a new life. She looked at me as if pleading for forgiveness. But I know him. This isn't about redemption. It's something else. I decided to find him. It was risky, but I couldn't let him remain in our lives. After a few days, I found his address. It was a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I rang the doorbell, and the door opened. Standing before me was the man I had only seen in photographs. He looked older than I expected, but the same smug gleam was still in his eyes. "Well, hello," he said, showing no surprise. "You must be Leah's husband." "Yes, and I'm here to ask you some questions," I replied, feeling my anger rising. He invited me inside. His apartment was minimalist, but every detail revealed someone who meticulously planned his actions. We sat at a table, and I began. "Why are you back?" I asked bluntly. "It's a long story," he said with a smirk. "But to keep it short, I always knew Leah, and I weren't finished. She is. And so am I. If that changes anything." My words were icy. "Maybe. But she deserves better than you," he said, leaning closer. "And I'm here to prove it." His arrogance infuriated me, but I knew I had to stay calm. "You think you can just come back and destroy everything?" I asked, clenching my fists. "Destroy? No. I'm here to fix things. But, I've learned some interesting things. For example, about your little secrets." Those words froze me. What did he know? How did he find out? "What are you trying to say?" I asked, feeling the tension grow. "It's simple. I know you're not who you pretend to be, and I'm sure Liao would be very interested to hear about it," he said with a grin that irritated me more than his words. I left his apartment with a heavy heart. His words were cryptic, but I couldn't ignore them. What exactly did he know? And how could he use it to ruin my life? When I returned home, Liao was waiting for me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with fear. "Did he say anything to you?" she asked. "Enough to know this isn't over," I replied, looking her straight in the eyes. Leah sat on the couch, her hands clasped on her lap. Her face was tense, like someone bracing for a storm. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for a way out of the corner she felt trapped in. I stood before her, arms crossed, waiting. "Speak," I finally said. "What else don't I know?" She looked at me, her lips trembling. "It's not just about us," she began, her voice barely audible. "It's much bigger than that. Be specific." I refused to relax. "Travis didn't come back because he wants me. He wants you," she said, and her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What does that mean?" I felt my anger mix with anxiety. Leah sighed, as if resigning herself to revealing the truth, no matter how terrible it was. "About 10 years ago, you worked on that project with all the contractors and big money, remember?" I nodded. That period in my life had been incredibly stressful. I hadn't paid attention to the details, just focused on doing my job and achieving results. "One of those contractors was connected to Travis," she continued, "and to the case he was arrested for." "Wait," I interrupted. "I had nothing to do with that." "But Travis thinks otherwise. He's convinced you did. That you're the one who leaked information about his operation." I was stunned. This all sounded like the plot of a thriller, not part of my life. "But I didn't," I said firmly, looking her in the eyes. "I know, but he needs someone to blame. And he's chosen you," she said. My heart raced. This was more than just betrayal or revenge. This was a game with stakes far higher than I had imagined. "And how does Amanda fit into this?" I asked. Leah hesitated. "Amanda, she worked for that company too, but she knew more than the others. She was connected to Travis even back then. So you knew Amanda was working with him and said nothing?" My voice rose. "I didn't know for sure," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I suspected, but I was afraid it would only make things worse. I didn't know what to do next. My whole life seemed trapped in a web." I walked into the kitchen, trying to calm down and think. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We're not done yet." Meet me tomorrow. I have an offer you can't refuse. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. It could only be Travis. When I returned to the living room, Liao was already standing near the door. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice filled with desperation. I looked at her. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear. This was no longer about trust or betrayal. This was about survival. "We're going to meet him. But this time, I'm not playing by his rules," I said. My voice as solid as stone. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Travis's message left little doubt. He was willing to go to any lengths to achieve his goal. But now I realized this game wasn't just about betrayal or revenge. It was about something bigger. I had to find a way to turn the situation in my favor. That evening, I spent hours in my office going through old files from that job. Some documents were encrypted, and I had never thought about their contents. But now I began to question everything. Could I have unknowingly been part of something bigger than just a project? The first few hours yielded nothing. All the paperwork seemed routine. Reports, contracts, specifications. But then I came across correspondence between several key individuals that seemed suspicious. One name appeared more often than the others: Jonathan Cale. He was the same contractor connected to the investigation that had implicated Travis. Jonathan Cale. I repeated the name, feeling the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. My next step was an internet search. His name was nearly erased from the digital space, but a few mentions remained. One post stood out, an old forum about corporate crimes. Someone using the username Keen Eye wrote that Cale was still involved in shady dealings, but now operated under a new identity. I dug deeper. It turned out that the company Amanda worked for had direct ties to one of his new firms. This explained why she was so closely connected to Travis. But how did this involve me? I kept searching and uncovered another fact. During that same project I worked on, one of the contracts had been terminated due to ethical violations. Everything was becoming more suspicious. At dawn, I realized I had to act. I called an old colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. "Max, is that you?" I heard a groggy voice on the other end. "Yeah, it's me." "Listen, I need your help," I said, trying to sound calm. Max was one of the few people who stayed with the company after the project ended. If anyone knew what had really happened, it was him. "What's going on?" he asked, now sounding alert. "I'm looking for information about Jonathan Cale. Do you remember him?" I asked. "I remember," Max replied after a brief pause. "But you realize this is a dangerous topic, right? I need to know the truth, Max. Is he still active?" My words were filled with urgency. "Yes. But don't talk about this over the phone. Let's meet. I know a place where we can talk safely," he said, and we arranged a meeting. The meeting took place in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Max was nervous, constantly glancing around as if someone was watching him. "Listen, Jonathan Cale isn't just a contractor. He was a key link in schemes I only know about partially," Max said, sipping his coffee. "But I heard he was looking for you after your project ended." "Why?" I asked, trying to understand how this could involve me. "Because you were the one who signed the final documents. And if there were any manipulations, you became their target without even knowing it." His words felt like a sentence. I couldn't even remember what documents I had signed back then, but now it seemed they could destroy my entire life. "So what do I do?" I asked. Max sighed. "Find proof that you were just following orders. You should have a copy of the contract that shows you acted within your responsibilities. If you can prove that, you'll buy yourself some time." When I returned home, Liao was waiting for me again. Her face looked tired, but now I saw not just fear in her eyes but also support. "What did you find out?" she asked. "More than I wanted to," I said. "But we need to act together if we want to get out of this." "I'm ready," she replied, but her words sounded like a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. That evening, I opened the safe where I kept old documents. I was searching for the contract that could be my lifeline. But instead, I found something else, a letter signed by Jonathan Cale. "You knew more than you want to admit. But now, you're on my turf." Reading that letter, I realized Jonathan Cale wasn't just a dangerous player, but someone who was always one step ahead. His words indicated he knew more than I was comfortable with. But I wasn't going to give up. I had spent years building my life, and now someone was trying to tear it all down. I shared my findings with Leah. Her face froze as I told her about Jonathan. But then, something new appeared in her eyes. Determination. If we want to win, we need information. And I know how to get it, she said with a sigh. How? I asked, looking at her suspiciously. Amanda, she replied, and I couldn't believe my ears. Amanda? She works for them, I objected. Exactly. But she doesn't know that I know. She trusts me more than you can imagine, Leah said. Her voice was cold but confident. I wanted to argue, but there was logic in her words. Amanda was a key link in this game, and if we could use her, it could change everything. That same evening, Leah messaged Amanda. She used the excuse of meeting for an honest conversation about everything that's happened. Amanda agreed, unaware of Leah's true motives. We decided Leah would go alone. It was risky, but it gave us the best chance. The meeting took place in a quiet restaurant. Amanda arrived a little early, looking calm and confident. Leah approached her table, her face tense but composed. Hi, Leah said as she sat down. We need to talk. Of course, Amanda replied. Her tone was friendly, but there was caution in her eyes. You look tired. Is everything okay? No, not everything is okay, Leah replied, not hiding her emotions. I know you're working with Travis. Those words unsettled Amanda, but she quickly regained her composure. You've got it all wrong, she began. No, I don't, Leah interrupted her. I know more than you think. But if you want to save yourself, you'll tell me everything you know about Jonathan Cale. The mention of that name made Amanda pale. She was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, she said. Then tell me, Leah replied, leaning closer. If I know the truth, I can fix this. Amanda began to talk. Her words were pieces of a puzzle that came together to form a bigger picture. It turned out that Jonathan Cale was working on a new scheme, using his old connections. He needed a scapegoat to deflect suspicion, and that scapegoat was supposed to be me. Travis and I were just tools, Amanda said. But now it's gone too far. Cale doesn't tolerate failure, and if you try to stop him, he'll destroy you. Then tell us how we can stop him, Leah insisted. Amanda thought for a moment, then pulled a flash drive out of her bag. Everything I've gathered over the years is on here. It's not much, but if used correctly, it could help. But be careful. Cale is dangerous. When Leah came home, her hands were trembling, but there was fire in her eyes. We have what we need, she said, handing me the flash drive. I plugged it into the computer. It contained financial reports, emails, and call logs that confirmed Cale's involvement in illegal activities. But one detail stood out, a name that appeared repeatedly in all the documents. My name. He's trying to frame me, I said through gritted teeth. But now we have evidence, Leah replied. We can change the game. As we were going through the files, my phone buzzed again. It was a new message from Travis. Nice try, but you're too late. Now it's all up to me. The flash drive with its information was my last chance. Every document, every email, every call log on it was a key to exposing Jonathan Cale's scheme. This was no longer just about saving myself. It was a chance to stop someone who had been destroying lives for years. I knew going to the police was risky. Cale had connections, and it was clear he could influence any investigation. So, I decided to take a different approach, to make his actions public. Public condemnation was the one weapon he couldn't stop. My first thought was to find a journalist who could help. I remembered an old acquaintance, Jake, who worked for a prominent publication. We hadn't spoken in years, but I decided to take the risk. Jake, it's me, I said when he answered the call. I need your help. Sounds serious, he replied. What's going on? I have material that could expose not just one person but an entire network. But I need your help to publish it, I said. He was silent for a few seconds. All right, let's meet tomorrow. Bring everything you have. The next day, I handed the flash drive to Jake. He listened intently to my story, reviewed the documents, and jotted down details. His eyes widened with each new revelation. This is a big deal, he said. But you realize that after publication, they'll come after you? I'm ready, I replied. If this is the only way to stop them, I'll do it. The article appeared a week later. The headline was bold: "The Dark Web of Business: How Jonathan Cale Manipulated the System for Years." The piece included all the evidence we had found: financial schemes, Amanda's testimony, and call logs. The reaction was immediate. The news spread like wildfire. Cale became the face of corporate greed. His name was on every channel, and journalists started digging even deeper. Within days, the police announced an official investigation. Travis didn't escape unscathed either. His connection to Cale became public, and now he found himself at the center of the scandal. He tried to contact me, but I ignored his calls. All he could do was watch as his ally fell. For Leah and me, it was a new beginning. She helped me navigate the chaos, and we decided to give our relationship a second chance. The betrayals between us became lessons. We realized that trust and openness are things that need to be protected. "Are you sure we can get through this?" she asked me one evening. "Yes, if we work on it together," I replied. Jonathan Cale was arrested a month later. The charges against him spanned multiple counts, and he faced a serious prison sentence. Travis disappeared from the public eye, and Amanda moved to another city to start a new life. Leah and I returned to a sense of normalcy, knowing that everything we had been through had made us stronger. Now, we had the chance to rebuild our relationship without lies and secrets. Do you think it's possible to fully restore trust after betrayal, even if both parties are willing to work on the relationship?